Come on, 2, 3.
Well, good morning. Welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder. This is BRN AM for Thursday, March 17th, 2022. And our top story today, the importance of aftercare and grief counseling. Joining me now to discuss this and a lot more, Greg King is with Saul Levinson and Brothers, Inc. Greg, great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us on the program this morning.
Sure, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
And we're going to talk about, it's great to see you, and we always love having you and your colleague Eliza on to talk about what really is a fundamental part of life, and that is death and dealing with it. And you and I were having a very interesting conversation off camera that I really want to start with, because our show today is about grief and managing grief and aftercare. But the role of a funeral director, your role in particular, you take on a lot of that burden and strain. How do you manage all that?
So, as funeral service professionals, and in my role as a funeral director, every day, sometimes, often multiple times a day, I sit down with families who are grieving. They are experiencing different levels of grief. Although all grief has its similarities, all grief is also different. And as a funeral director, I think that we key in often on what the families are feeling, and that kind of can affect how we feel. I walk into arrangements very often for somebody, let's say an older person, somebody who's lived a long life and seen grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and the family is grateful that their loved one experienced a long life. They're grateful. They seem they're in a sense good spirits. I mean, it's good to hide as high a level as they can. And that, as a funeral director, of course, that's what we wish to see all the time. Sitting down with a family that's weighed down by grief, of course, as a funeral director, we take that on sometimes also. So one way we do, we have to channel our grief, the grief that we take on, to helping families to trying to get some sort of satisfaction out of what we're doing as helping families. And that probably helps us get through the grief that we take on. And then staying physically, getting out stress and emotion physically, mentally, things like that. We need to just we have to take a lot of time as funeral directors for self-care. So
it really is an important role. I think a lot of people underestimate. It's not just about preparing your body, putting you in the ground, or wherever you're going to your final resting place. There's a lot more there. Greg, all right, let's talk about grief, because according to my research I did before our show, which was effectively Google. So thanks, Google. They're not a sponsor. Maybe they will be. But there are 5 stages of grief. And I, as a funeral director, how do you define grief? And really, what are those stages that we need to be looking out for, either for ourselves in terms of self-care or for our family members and others?
Sure. Good question. So, grief takes on, and I think what you're referring to, the 5 stages of grief that was created or come up with by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And she kind of boiled it down to sort of 5 basic stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Or in mortuary school, we learned as DABDA, just to help remember it. And really, I think it's originally these 5 stages were understood as, okay, it's an order. Okay, first I'll be in denial, then I'll be angry, then I'll start to negotiate with God or so forth about, bargain with them about extending my life or extending my loved one's life. However, I think that what they've found, and maybe what was a misunderstanding, is that some of these stages of grief happen in different order, and they happen for different amounts of time. Sometimes denial stage is brief. Sometimes denial stage is long. Sometimes we're negotiating with sort of the powers that be for a long period of time. Sometimes we're barely doing that at all. So it really just depends on the type of grief someone's going through, who's passed away, who that person is, whether they're mentally prepared, and whether they've sort of coped with grief and loss before. All factors into the level in which someone will experience, or the length of time they'll experience different stages.
And thanks for that summary. And I think that the key point there is that we're all individuals, we're all unique, and we're going to go through this in maybe different orders and in a different time frame. What happens for me may be very different, will be very different from you. If I'm a family member, maybe I'm not related to the relative or a family member or a friend of the family, how do I recognize this? And what can I do to support this loved one, this person, through a difficult time, even though it may not appear difficult to me, right? I mean, we can all have different perspectives on a loss. I would say, hey, right. It was their time. It was, it's unfortunate. We all can compartmentalize. But how do I support somebody else?
So I think that one of the most important ways to support somebody who's going through grief is it's easier than we think. I think that we try to solve things too much. We can't solve the problem. We can't make it all better. But being there for someone, just being a sounding board, listening. Sometimes it's better to be a good listener. You don't have the solution, but you can listen. You can hear what they're saying. You can hear how they're feeling. So being there for that person, that's one thing. We also find, and it's natural to sort of express this because you want to be help to the person. You want to be of service to the person. Say, let me know if you need anything. Please let me know. And you mean that sincerely. But really, it's hard to ask for help. So that person, the person who's bereaved, wants, in a sense, even if they're not saying it, they would love for you to just help them without them having to ask. So, you have somebody whose spouse dies, and the spouse was and this is an easy example, the spouse was the one who did the food shopping and cooked. So maybe you make a few prepared meals and you bring them over. You call them and say, I'm going to bring over a few meals for you. Or I made such and such. I have a big casserole. I'm going to cut it in half and give it to you so you can have for a few days. Those types of things go a long way in helping that person, relieving that burden from the person, because they're weighed down by their grief. It's not easy for them to necessarily function and go through our normal needs and functions of life, because you have this burden of grief. So if you can, as a friend, as a family member, do things, help alleviate that and help them concentrate on themselves more, that's always helpful.
Yeah. Greg, I need to take a very quick break. When we come back, we'll talk more about the aftercare process and the grieving process, what you can do, what your family members can do, and a lot more. You're going to want to stay tuned right here on BRN AM. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms, especially for the smaller businesses? I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network.
Are you stuck with a low credit score? A credit report and score that's causing you to be denied credit or pay higher interest rates than others for the same things? Then do what Terrence did and call Credit Repaired for your free credit evaluation to help restore your credit.
I started thinking about buying a new house, and my score wasn't where I needed it to be. I called and spoke with one of the representatives, and we just had a good conversation, and I liked what he was saying.
Just one call for his free credit evaluation was all it took to start back on the track to repairing his credit.
I'm seeing the deletions and I'm getting the report, so I know something's being done. It does make a difference to me.
All it takes is one call to get started.
Credit Repair has given me a second chance to have a better credit score.
Don't let a low credit score hold you back another day. Do what Terrence did and make the call for your free credit evaluation.
Call 800-819-4152. That's 800-819-4152. Again, 800-819-4152.
Welcome back. We're talking this morning to Greg King of Saul Levinson and Brothers, Inc. Greg, thanks so much for staying with us this morning.
Absolutely.
All right, Greg, this is a really important topic. Really appreciate your defining grief, the different stages of grief, and what we need to look out for as friends, family, supporters of an individual. Let's talk about aftercare and grief counseling and the time after a funeral or the time after a service when everyone kind of departs has to be some of the most difficult time for a person where life returns, and I put that in quotes, to normal. What do we need to be thinking about in terms of aftercare?
So what you lead into a good point. We think of the hardest time when someone has a loss as being there at the funeral. The act of burying somebody is hard, is the ultimate in pain. And not to diminish that, it is difficult to bury a loved one, to see them return to the earth, and the finality of that is very difficult. But what we often don't see is after the funeral, after everybody's gone home, and the bereaved person, the spouse, the child, the parent, is left by themselves, doesn't have the community there, physically there at the moment. And that's scary to people. What do I do? How do I go on now? I had all these people here supporting me, feeding me, talking about my husband, and now it's quiet. That is extremely difficult. And that's where aftercare and remembering that grief continues. It doesn't stop when the funeral ends. Grief continues for weeks, months, years, or perpetually. So seeking help, seeking counseling, seeking support groups are essential to going through the healthy process of grief. We all go through grief, and it can be our choice whether it can be unhealthy grief or healthy grief. And part of that is doing what you need to do, again, to take care of yourself. And that's kind of a theme with grief, is taking care of yourself, doing what you need to do.
Greg, where do I go? I would imagine there are church groups, synagogue groups, mosque groups. Mm-hmm. If you're agnostic, there are probably agnostic groups.
Sure.
How do I seek out a support group? And I think that's hard. That first step to seek out help, always the toughest, whether it's losing weight, but especially grief. It's so private, so individualized.
Absolutely. And I think that there's a difference sometimes between men and women. Women tend to seek out help more often than men do. Men tend to internalize. A man loses their wife, and the man wants to be tough. He doesn't need to talk to someone. Women tend to have a much more healthy respect for their capacity to grieve. And so the first steps, religious institutions, and where you maybe found comfort and joy before you suffered the loss is a good place to start after you suffer the loss. So just what you said, church groups, most churches, if they're active, have grief groups, bereavement groups, synagogues, mosques, any religious organizations. But then also, if you're not affiliated with any religious organization, if your loved one was in hospice, often the hospice has resources for grief groups. There are often grief groups that are run by different counties, at the public libraries, places like that. You just need to find the reason. You need to just ask the questions. There are social workers. It's so many different institutions that have social workers that can direct you to the right people to get help. But you just have to first start by asking.
Really, it's right. It's up to you. You've got to take an initiative as an individual or on behalf of someone else, because you're right. Sometimes we're stubborn and we just want to keep it to ourselves. Greg, if we get into one of these groups, what in terms of support, what do we expect on that first day? I mean, is it like what we imagine with an AA like meeting where you introduce yourself and you say I have been X, Y, and Z. This happened to me, or what's the expectation for participation in a group?
So the expectation in a group, and it's generally up to the facilitator to sort of dictate to what capacity someone should participate. And there's always different levels. A good group is not going to force you to do anything. I'm not going to a group that says, well, you have a requirement to speak for X amount of time. Sometimes people aren't ready for that. Sometimes people just want to listen. After a while, when you listen to people's stories, sometimes you want to share your own. You may not be the kind of person that wants to just jump right in and start, spelling out their story. So a good grief group should allow you to ease in. They may encourage you to participate. They may, ask you if you want to participate. But if you're not comfortable doing that initially, you don't have to. But eventually, you're only going to help yourself by sharing. Remaining silent in a group for the entire duration of the group, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, however long it is certainly has value in just hearing other people's stories. But the most you're going to get out of it is by sharing on your own, sharing your feelings, sharing your story, and so forth.
Yeah, it's about your level of comfort, and the more engaged you can be, the better off I think you'll be. It sounds like you'll be longer term. Well, Greg, it's been a pleasure to chat with you. I want to thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to having you back on the program again very soon.
I'd love to, Jeff. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and look forward to talking to you another time.
That wraps up this episode of BRN AM. Have a topic of interest, someone you think we should talk to, drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the latest curated news in lifestyle, wellness, finance, tech, so much more, check out today's edition of our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse. Want to see our latest content or search our archives? Check out our website, that's www.broadcastretirementnetwork.com. And of course, our streaming partners like Amazon, Roku, Samsung, and over 100 more. We're back again tomorrow for another edition of BRN AM. Until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.
Waiting here for you to take and drink of. But if you're tired,
Now is your opportunity to co-create content around any topic on the first lifestyle and wellness network. Reach a global audience through our platform and co-own exclusive branded content. All of our programs are available on demand and also as audio-only podcasts, so you can take us on the go. Broadcast Retirement Network, available anytime, anywhere, and on any device.
Are you being audited and do you owe the IRS $10,000 or more in back taxes? Is the IRS threatening to take more of your money? Don't fight the IRS alone. The Tax Doctor is here to help you negotiate your tax bill and reduce your stress. The IRS can freeze your assets and seize your bank accounts, but you can stop these IRS actions. The Tax Doctor will work with you using our years of experience to represent your case to help you get the best resolution under the IRS guidelines. Help is here to deal with the IRS to reduce your stress. We've handled thousands of cases, so we know what we're doing. If you owe $10,000 or more in back taxes, do not call the IRS alone. Call a tax doctor now for a tax emergency analysis.
Call 800-224-6439.